Hyman Roth might be the best villain in the Godfather saga, and the movie borrowed most of his story from a real man named Meyer Lansky. Cuba casinos, the Israel deportation, the friend who helped build Las Vegas, all of that happened. But Lansky's real life stretched far beyond what a 2-hour movie could hold. He helped build the American mob from the street up, ran gambling on 3 different land masses, and beat the federal government in court. The way it ended, if you ask me, is stranger and sadder than anything Hollywood could have written. That story starts in 1902 in the city of Grodno, deep inside the Russian Empire. Meyer Lansky was born, Meyer Suchaljansky. His family was Jewish and poor. The area they lived in, the Pale of Settlement, was known for pogroms and had almost nothing to offer a Jewish family looking for a future. In 1911, when Lansky was 9 years old, the family left everything and immigrated to the United States. They landed on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. His father took work as a garment presser. The neighborhood was overcrowded, rough, and running on its own set of rules. If you grew up there in that era, you either found a trade or you found a hustle. Lansky found both. He left school after 8th grade, picked up tool and die work, became an auto mechanic, and on the side he started running street craps games with a kid he met in the neighborhood named Benjamin Siegel. Siegel would later become known as Bugsy, though nobody called him that to his face. The two were inseparable almost immediately. They graduated from dice games into auto theft, then into bootlegging once Prohibition arrived. By the early 1920s, Lansky and Siegel had formed what became known as the Bugs and Meyer mob. It was one of the most violent bootlegging outfits in the city, and it also served as a murder-for-hire operation that historians consider the prototype for what eventually became Murder, Inc. Around the same time, Lansky crossed paths with another young hustler named Charles Luciano. The story that gets repeated most often is that Luciano tried to shake Lansky down for protection money on his walk home from school. Lansky refused to pay. Luciano, impressed by the kid who would not fold, became his friend instead. The three of them, Lansky, Siegel, and Luciano, spent the next decade turning the mob from a collection of street gangs into an organized national operation. If you watch The Godfather Part 2, you would never know any of this. The movie introduces Roth as an elderly man already at the end of his career. There's a deleted scene showing a young Roth meeting Vito Corleone, but it never made the theatrical cut. In the finished film, Roth just shows up old and sick. You never see him as a young man on the Lower East Side, never see him building power alongside Siegel and Luciano for 30 years. He just appears as Michael's opponent. In my view, that is probably the single biggest way the movie shrinks the real man. By the early 1930s, Lansky, Siegel, and Luciano had built a coalition. In 1929, Luciano organized a conference in Atlantic City with help from Lansky, Johnny Torrio, and Frank Costello. Out of that meeting came the foundation of what would later be called the National Crime Syndicate, a multi-ethnic network of Italian, Jewish, and Irish criminal organizations, designed to pool resources, divide territory, and settle disputes without open warfare. Before this, the mob was just a bunch of competing gangs. After this, it operated more like a business. Lansky ran the money side. Other bosses trusted him because he knew how to move cash and keep it hidden while it grew. The FBI once said he would have been chairman of the board of General Motors if he had gone into legitimate business. Britannica calls him one of the most powerful United States crime syndicate chiefs, and the Mob Museum in Las Vegas puts it even more bluntly, calling him one of the key figures behind organized crime's expansion across the country and overseas. The Godfather Part 2 does not need any of that history for its own story to work. But if you walk away from the film thinking Roth was just one old man trying to outmaneuver Michael Corleone, to me, you are seeing a very small piece of what Lansky actually was. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the bootlegging money dried up. But Lansky had already seen what came next: gambling. By 1936, he had operations running in Florida and New Orleans, and he had started looking 90 miles south, at Cuba. Lansky built a relationship with Fulgencio Batista, the Cuban dictator, that worked like a straight business deal. Batista allowed Lansky and other mobsters to run casinos in Havana with almost no interference. In return, Batista took a large cut of the revenue. Under this arrangement, Lansky owned or held financial stakes in at least 3 major casinos on the island: the Habana Riviera, the Hotel Nacional, and the Montmartre Club. Cuba was where Lansky poured his energy and his money for over a decade, and he treated Havana like the center of his entire gambling operation. The Godfather Part 2 captures the feel of this era: the Havana scenes, the partnership with Batista, the golden telephone ceremony. Every bit of it comes from real events. The golden telephone in the film was actually based on a real ceremony in which Batista received a golden phone from the American ambassador. That phone is still on display at the Museum of the Revolution in Havana. But the movie compresses Lansky's Cuban years into one deal, one trip, and one revolution. Lansky spent years on that island. And when Fidel Castro came to power in 1959, nationalizing the casinos and outlawing gambling, Lansky did not lose a business deal. He lost the casinos, the political relationships, and the entire gambling network he had spent more than a decade building on that island. I mean, think about that for a second. Years of deal-making with Batista's government, millions of dollars in casino construction, all gone in a matter of months. And Lansky kept moving. After Cuba fell, he turned to the Bahamas, building new casino operations on Grand Bahama and Paradise Islands throughout the 1960s. The movie never touches any of that. Roth exists in one moment of Cuban collapse and then heads toward his ending. Lansky just moved on and started again somewhere else. The relationship between Lansky and Siegel did not end when they stopped running bootlegging routes together. It lasted all the way to the desert. The emotional center of Roth's character in The Godfather Part 2 is his bond with Moe Greene. Roth delivers a speech about a kid he grew up with. He describes a man of vision and guts who had an idea to build a city out of a desert. That kid was Moe Greene, and the city he built was Las Vegas. Roth talks about Greene with love and grief, and his desire to avenge Greene's murder drives much of his war against Michael. Moe Greene is based on Bugsy Siegel. The real relationship between Lansky and Siegel was not something you could capture in one monologue. They had been partners since they were kids, building everything together from bootlegging to murder for hire. And when Siegel decided to go west, first to Hollywood and then to the Nevada desert, Lansky backed him financially. They were true partners. In the mid-1940s, Siegel saw an opening. William Wilkerson, a Hollywood nightlife figure, had started building the Flamingo Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Siegel pushed his way into the project and eventually took it over. The original budget was $1.5 million. By the time the Flamingo opened in late 1946, the cost had hit $6 million, most of it syndicate money from the East Coast. Siegel had been skimming off the top, overspending on construction and keeping records so bad that nobody could tell where the money was actually going. His girlfriend, Virginia Hill, was reportedly funneling stolen funds into European bank accounts. The syndicate bosses were furious. A meeting was held in Havana in 1946, with Luciano himself attending from exile. The question was simple: should Siegel be killed? What happened next depends on who you believe. Some accounts say Lansky argued against it, that he wanted Siegel to have more time and believed the Flamingo could still work. Other sources, including Britannica, say Lansky ordered the execution himself after Siegel kept burning through syndicate money. which looking back was either incredibly loyal or incredibly foolish, depending on which version of events you trust. Either way, the result was the same. On June 20th, 1947, Siegel was shot and killed through the window of his Beverly Hills home. Shortly after, 3 of Lansky's associates walked into the Flamingo and announced a change in management. The property eventually became a money machine for Las Vegas and generated income for Lansky and his partners for the next 20 years. But Siegel was dead at 41, and no amount of future profit changed that. Lansky said in interviews later in his life that if it had been up to him, Siegel would still be alive. The movie captures the grief of that bond in one speech, and I think that speech is one of the best scenes ever filmed. But the real story behind it is vast. There was the construction disaster, the Havana vote, the question of whether Lansky tried to save Siegel or signed off on his death, and then the shock of watching his own associates seize the Flamingo hours after the murder. You cannot fit the whole story into a monologue. It is too big. If you're finding this interesting, hit subscribe. I cover the real history behind crime films every week. For over 2 decades after Siegel's death, Lansky stayed in the game without ever becoming a household name. He avoided the spotlight the way other bosses avoided indictments. But by 1970, the federal government had finally caught up. Lansky was indicted on tax evasion charges, and instead of standing trial, he ran. He flew to Israel and settled in the coastal town of Herzliya Pitua. He applied to stay permanently under the law of return, which allows anyone of Jewish descent to settle in Israel. The Israeli government, under heavy pressure from Washington, denied his application. Lansky fought the decision in court, but in 1972, he was deported back to the United States. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. Being turned away from Israel was, by multiple accounts, one of the worst blows Lansky ever took personally. He had wanted to be buried beside his grandfather on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. Instead, he was put on a plane back to the country that had been building a case against him for years. The Godfather Part 2 takes this history and uses it almost directly. Roth tries to retire to Israel. His application is denied. He is sent back. The film gets all of that right. Where it departs from real life, and I would argue this is the single biggest change in the entire movie, is what happens after. In the film, Hyman Roth is assassinated at the Miami airport by one of Michael's men. It is a violent public execution modeled after the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald. Michael gets his revenge, and the story gets its closure. And as a piece of filmmaking, I get why they did it. After the premiere, Lansky reportedly called Lee Strasberg, the actor who played Roth, and told him he did a good job. And according to multiple accounts, he added that Strasberg could have made him more sympathetic. Whether that call happened exactly as people describe it or has grown into legend, it tells you Lansky was watching. He saw what Hollywood did with his life, and whatever he thought about the performance, there is no way he recognized himself in that ending. In real life, nobody killed Meyer Lansky. He came back to the United States, stood trial for tax evasion, and was acquitted. Some of the remaining charges against him were dropped because of his declining health. After the trial, he went home to Miami Beach, and that was it. The man the FBI had been chasing for decades moved into a second-floor apartment at the Imperial House on Collins Avenue and started living like a retired accountant. Every morning at 6, when Collins Avenue was still empty, Lansky walked his dog along the sidewalk. He drove a Chevrolet. He ate regularly at Wolfie's, the deli on Collins Avenue where half of Jewish Miami Beach went for pastrami and cheesecake. He borrowed books from the public library. Time magazine described him as barely 5.5 feet tall in elevator shoes. That was the man the federal government spent 30 years trying to put away. a small, bow-legged old man in a Miami Beach condo, eating deli food and returning library books. The mob never came for him. Lansky just got old. And the ending of this story is nothing like what the movie gave you. In my opinion, it is worse. The Godfather Part 2 gives Hyman Roth a dramatic death. A bullet at the airport, quick and violent, the kind of ending that works in a mob movie. The real ending had none of that, but it had something the movie could never touch. When Meyer Lansky died of lung cancer at Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami Beach on January 15, 1983, his total personal assets came to $58,401.67. That is not a rough estimate. That is what the estate records showed. His hospital bills at the time of death were $16,000, and the federal Medicare program covered most of it. The man the FBI once claimed was worth $300 million died on government health insurance. His second wife, Teddy, went on 60 Minutes in 1989 and called the $300 million claim preposterous and ridiculous. Whether she was telling the truth or protecting hidden money is something nobody has been able to prove either way, but what happened next suggests she might not have been lying. Lansky's eldest son, Buddy, had been born with cerebral palsy in 1930. The disease crippled him gradually over the years. He had worked for a while as a switchboard operator at a motel in Sunny Isles just north of Miami Beach, but eventually the condition got too bad to work. Lansky set up a trust to pay for Buddy's care. 3 years after Lansky died, the trust ran out of money. 3 years. If there were hidden millions buried somewhere, nobody used them to keep Buddy Lansky out of a county nursing home. Buddy was moved to Arch Creek Convalescent Home, where his care was covered by Social Security and $50 a month in county funds. In 1989, 6 years after his father's death, Buddy stopped eating. He turned his face toward the wall and refused food and water. 2 days later, he was dead. He was buried beside his father at Mount Nebo Cemetery in Miami Beach. I think about that when I watch The Godfather Part 2. Hyman Roth gets a bullet at the airport and the audience gets closure. The real ending was a man's disabled son dying in a county nursing home because the trust fund ran dry 6 years after the supposed mob billionaire was buried with $58,000 to his name. The Godfather Part 2 takes Lansky's real history and squeezes it down. Cuba, which was a decades-long operation for Lansky, becomes one deal in the film. Siegel, his lifelong friend and partner, gets reduced to a single monologue. And the Israel deportation, which in real life led to a long, messy legal fight and a quiet retirement, gets turned into a setup for a dramatic assassination. The way I see it, the movie needed Roth to be Michael Corleone's enemy. But Lansky was never just one man's enemy. He ran gambling in Florida, Cuba, Vegas, and the Bahamas across 40 years of American crime. The film uses pieces of that, but only the pieces that fit the Corleone story. And the movie gives Roth a death that makes sense in the world of The Godfather. But the real death, the library books and the deli food and the Chevrolet and the son who turned his face to the wall, is a story no screenplay could sell because it is quiet and ordinary and genuinely sad. None of that works as a final act in a movie about Sicilian revenge. And if you want the full story of what happened to Henry Hill from Goodfellas after the ending, that video is on screen now.